In a moment, life can change forever. And unfortunately, Lora Jones has experienced the nightmare of loss. In her book, Songs of a Wounded Heart, she shares how she learned to hope and trust again after losing everything through tragedy. Lora, welcome to Real Life.
Thank you. It's such an honor to be here.
I'm so glad that you found the hope after the tragedy. Can you share with us your story?
Absolutely. My husband and I were in the ministry. He was a pastor in 3 different states over the course of about 20 years. And in 2004, we lived in a small town in northeastern Oklahoma called Miami, Oklahoma.
I know where that is.
Do you know where that is? It's a wonderful place. It is a wonderful place full of just beautiful people. Well, it was the best time that in our lives we had ever had. We'd had some tough times, some seriously tough times, and when we moved there, we were pretty broken people. But God had systematically put us back together. He brought some healing physically, emotionally, spiritually, healing in our marriage. And by the time we got to 2004, we were at the top of our game. Life was really good. And then we just planned a trip home to Southwest Kansas to visit our families for the Thanksgiving holiday. And along the way, I fell asleep in the front seat of the van. But the temperature was dropping as we drove, and the rain changed into snow. There was some black ice on the highway that neither driver was expecting, and a pickup coming from the other way slid on that black ice and hit us head on. So when I woke up, it was really difficult to absorb everything I was seeing. It was like my brain couldn't connect the dots and understand. But right in the middle of it all, God began to sing. It was a song that I had heard on the radio, but I didn't know. So I was dependent upon Him to give it to me kind of like in sound bites. In the beginning, He simply said, "Do not be afraid." And He sang that over and over, "Do not be afraid." I was terrified as I looked around the van and absorbed we'd been in a horrific accident, and I didn't know what to do. I was having trouble physically myself as well. And as they strapped me to that backboard and began to take me out of the vehicle, God sang the next part of that song, and it says, "The voice of truth says, this is for my glory." And I thought, okay, then that means it's going to be all right, right? You're going to do something, you're going to intervene, it's going to be okay. So I wasn't prepared for it when the chaplain came to the foot of my bed in the little hospital they took me to, and they said, "Your son and your husband didn't survive, and we don't expect your daughter to live through the night." And right then that song concluded. It says, "Out of all the voices calling out to me, I will choose to listen and believe the voice of truth." And I clung to that because they were right. They took me to the big trauma center nearby where my daughter was, and I was with her when she joined her dad and her brother in heaven. And I began a long journey, a long faith journey of learning how to trust in God, the same God that I knew and loved and had heard before. But when you hit this kind of a change, you're at a crossroads. Are you going to keep believing or not? And I realized that if I chose not to run to God, then that would mean I'd lose even more. That would mean I would be choosing to believe that there is no God to help me, there is no life after this one. And no, I knew that God's presence was there in the van. I knew His voice. I knew God is real. And so I ran to Him instead of away from Him. In every form, I fought with Him, I cried with Him.
Lord, take us through that journey, because just hearing that, it's unfathomable for most of us to just think, like, one minute you're, spending the holidays with your family, and then like that, they're gone. Take us through that journey of how God just really met you in the midst of mourning, of grief, of suffering and loss.
He did. One of the things that he did, he tricked me into staying in the Bible. My husband had written a walk through the Bible specifically for our church, and I thought, that is such a strange thing to do because you can get them anywhere. But he was rewriting one just specifically for our church. And then he said, we're gonna start through this together in September. And I thought, don't you know you start anything new in January? What are you doing? And he said, no, God has really impressed upon me we are to start it together as a church family in September. We didn't live to January. And so I think for all of us, but certainly for me, we had made that commitment to Jay to read the word together. And so I kept reading it for Jay. I wish I could tell you that I would have just automatically kept reading the Bible, but I know I wouldn't have. But God knew that. And so he set all this up for me. We read it 4 different places in the Bible every day. They were small pieces. And those passages made so much difference. I've just learned that when you take your story to the Bible and you study the characters in the Bible and look at their stories, you'll find yourself in there.
Wow.
And God still interacts with us the same way he interacted with them. And it helps so much, makes the Bible come to life.
I'm kind of taken away because you're smiling when you talk. You look like you have joy. You look like a woman that would even enjoy her life now after having come through probably the worst thing that could probably ever happen to a woman of God. How did you do that? What were some practical things you did? You read the Bible, but you had to take some other steps into getting to the place that you are today.
You know, the verse that we just read was, he comes that we might have life. I really didn't want life. I didn't want the life that God had chosen for me to have because it didn't make sense that I was alive. It really didn't. Once I saw pictures of the van, I realized I quit asking the question, why did they die? And started asking the question, why am I here? And I'm not too happy about that. And I communicated with God openly, and I communicated with others openly and wrestled out loud. Because I was used to being a pastor's wife. I was used to being watched. But this was kind of like being in a glass bubble on a hill, you know. Everybody was watching me, so I just decided to wrestle it through. And God used a lot of things. There's so many stories in that book that I could tell you today, but he used a lot of things to help me wrestle through wanting to live again. Wow. It was a process. You got to remember, I'm sitting here 15 years later.
Yes.
It doesn't happen overnight, but it does happen. God slowly remade my heart and allowed it to work again. One of the most important things that I learned was that healing for a heart is not the absence of pain. That's what we want it to be. But yes, I can smile, but yes, I still cry and mourn and miss them and daydream about the day when I can see them again. So it's a long process. It's one you have to throw yourself into and trust your God to put it all back together and give you a reason to live. Yeah.
Lora, you said something really powerful that just really hit my heart about you have to wrestle it through. And I think a lot of times when we go through tragedy and we go through loss and we're in this place and in this pit, we just want to get out. We're just like, God, like, pull me out. But through what you went through, you're speaking about is when you're on that journey that you really have to go through that journey of long suffering, because it even is a fruit of the Spirit to just tarry through those tribulations and things and still trusting and knowing that he is good despite the things that are happening in our lives.
Yes. You know, you think about a pendulum and you pull it to one side and it swings evenly both ways, right? So if you think about our negative emotions and our pain on one side and our joy on the other side, that, you know, we want this side, we don't want this side. We try with all kinds of things to stop the pain. some good things and some bad things, but we try to stop the pain. So what happens to a pendulum when you stick your hand in it? It stops swinging. So you have to allow yourself the pain in order to receive the joy. Yeah. You have to have both. That's how God created our heart. We'll experience a time when there is no pain, but it's not here.
So how did songs comfort you and help you through this?
Well, music has always been the language of my soul. God can talk to me in song in ways that I'm not willing to listen otherwise. And so repeatedly, in every chapter you'll find a song. Repeatedly, God brought a song to mind that helped me understand the next thing that I needed to, to understand. But ultimately, the song of a wounded heart is hope.
Yes.
And hope has a name.
Yes.
His name is Jesus.
I just even sense right now, Laura, that there's people watching. Like I know in social media, like car accidents happen every day and people have lost loved ones. What would you say to that person, that mother, that father, that daughter, that son, whoever it is that has gone through this, walked through that tragedy and lost a loved one? What would you say to encourage them and to say, these are the steps that helped me on my journey for healing?
Well, first, I think that they need to know that Jesus cares. There's a story in the Bible of a widow who is burying her only son, and Jesus walks up into that funeral, and he doesn't just watch her go by. He walks clear up into the funeral and touches the body of her son, and it says that his heart went out to her. And that's what we have to know, that he cares. His heart goes out to us. His heart went out to me. A pastor at one of the funerals that we had for my family said, I'm going to ask the question that everybody's asking. Where was God? Where was God that night? And he said, I'm going to tell you where he was. He was standing beside the van crying with Lora. If we can really grasp that he cares, then we know we can go to him with our anger, with our questions. And that's what I would say. Go to the Bible, read it, let it come to life, but talk to God in all of the good, bad, and the ugly. Talk to him because he cares.
So now that there's a 15-year space between the tragedy and today, what would you say to people that they're living there and they look back and it's like they're still there?
Yeah.
And it's still that intense. What would you say to them?
I think I would say to curl up on God's lap and just let yourself mourn. So, you know, the Beatitudes say, blessed are those who are mourned, so they'll be comforted. So you want to find comfort, it's okay to mourn and to keep mourning. Grieving is kind of like standing at the ocean. Sometimes it just laps at your feet and the memories come gently and you can remember the things that happened, the good things. And then sometimes the tide comes in and just knocks you off your feet, and there isn't anything you can do except just ride it out. And that's okay too. It's okay.
Do friendships play an important part in the process, relationships?
Yes, Miami. What I loved about that place is I felt like they just formed a cocoon around me.
Yes.
They took care of basic needs. There was a note on my refrigerator that said, if you need help with the yard, call this person. If the plumbing breaks, call this person. If this happens, call this person. Those were wonderful things. People that allowed me to say whatever was on my heart without judgment. Yes, we need the body of Christ.
Yes.
That's so true. And I'm just, sensing, Amy, is that, if that you're listening and you're connecting to what Laura's just shared, and you've walked through tragedy, you've walked through pain and loss, we want you to call our prayer line. We are standing here with you because we want to pray with you and be with you, because we know that trials come and tribulations happen, but Jesus is with you. That maybe just as Laura, so pointedly said about you're standing on the shores and the water's just rushing your feet, and sometimes that tide comes and knocks you out. We are the ones that we want to hold your hand and be with you on the other line of the phone and hold your hand so you can walk.